just a brief introduction. So what we'll be covering today is the 3rd U.S. Regular Infantry's actions at the Battle of 2nd Manassas, obviously heavily focused on August 30th. That was the only day they were in any significant combat, and they were engaged all day. And I think my other two hosts will agree that it's one of their finer days of fighting in the course of the war. So Darrell's going to introduce the campaign and the battle to us and take us up to the morning of the 30th. So Darrell, do you want to take it away?
Truly, we're beginning at the start of August. It's a month now past the Battle of Malvern Hill, basically the collapse of McClellan's Peninsula campaign, and he's still sitting at Harrison's Landing, on the James River. And Abraham Lincoln appoints John Pope to come east and command this new Army of Virginia, which essentially is the two divisions of Banks and Milroy that had fought Jackson in the Shenandoah Valley. And because Pope had some minor success in the West, Lincoln thought he was more aggressive than McClellan. He brought him east. Pope had two objectives: protect Washington and the Shenandoah Valley, and to try to draw the forces away from McClellan by moving toward the Virginia Central Rail Hub at Gordonsville. Lee's been watching McClellan for a month, perceived he's no longer a threat, and so he relocates Stonewall Jackson to Gordonsville to block Pope and to protect the railroad. Now the Union Army split between McClellan and Pope, and there's probably about 100 miles between the two. Lee saw an opportunity to destroy Pope before turning his attention to McClellan. He sent A.P. Hill with his division to join Jackson with 12,000 men. On August 3rd, General-in-Chief Henry Halleck directs McClellan to withdraw from the peninsula and come to northern Virginia to support Pope. McClellan didn't want to do this. There's a lot of back and forth, and so he doesn't begin redeploying until August 14th, about 5 days after the Battle of Cedar Mountain, in which Jackson and Hill had defeated Banks. So here we are, 14th of August. After more than a month of inactivity since the 7 days battles, the 5th Army Corps, which includes the 3rd Infantry, the 1st Corps of the Army of the Potomac, to leave Harrison's Landing for Newport News. Sykes' division receives orders in the afternoon to strike tents and prepare, and the 1st Regiments depart about 6 p.m. They march through the night, resting only for about 2 hours at midnight. 5 days later, on August 18th, after passing through Williamsburg and Yorktown, the division reaches Newport News. There they get 2 days to clean up and rest after all that time of marching across the peninsula. On the 20th, the 3rd Infantry and other units of Sykes' division board the steamer Elm City at Newport News, bound for Aquia Creek on the Potomac River. August 21st, the Elm City arrives at Aquia Creek east of Fredericksburg. There they board rail cars for Falmouth Station, and they bivouac at Falmouth on August 21st and 22nd. August 23rd, the troops receive rations and begin marching north and west till they reach the Orange and Alexandria Railroad at Bealeton. From there, they follow the railroad and they reach Bristow Station on August 28th. The march was remembered as a severe one. Parts of the country seemed to be destitute of water, which caused us great suffering, and many were overcome and dropped by the wayside. This was recalled by Augustus Myers of the 2nd Infantry in his book, 10 Years in the Ranks. August 29th, resumed the march at daybreak. The 3rd Infantry and the rest of the 5th Corps passes through Manassas Junction. There they witnessed the ruins of locomotives, cars, and immense quantities of rations destroyed by fire a few days before. Of course, we know that Stonewall Jackson had burned the supply depot, taking what they could use and destroying the rest. The soldiers could use some of those supplies, though. The last issue of rations had been at Warrenton Junction on August 26th, and the men are now reduced to half rations. During the night of the 29th, they'll receive a small ration of hardtack and nothing else. Shortly after passing Manassas, the 5th Corps is ordered to about face because now they've gone east of the enemy's position at Groveton. They take the Warrenton Pike back toward Gainesville, but before reaching that place, they encounter the 1st of Longstreet's troops arriving to reinforce Jackson. Sykes' division takes up a position near Bethlehem Church and masses as a reserve in support of the 1st Division. There's some fighting between the skirmishers of the 1st Division and Longstreet's troops, and some movements as though we were forming for an attack with the object of preventing Longstreet from sending reinforcements to Jackson, but nothing came of it, and we remained in our position until daybreak. First Brigade Commander Lieutenant Colonel Robert Buchanan reports that at daylight on the morning of the 30th, we took up our line of march from our bivouac on the Manassas and Gainesville Road in the direction of Bull Run, reached that stream about 10 a.m., after which I was ordered to place my brigade in the field fronting the Dogan House. From here, I'm going to pass it over to Dave Welker, and he's going to talk about the main actions on the morning of August 30th.
So to build on Darrell's introduction, I want to emphasize two things before I get into the account of what the 3rd U.S. was doing the morning of 30 August 1862. I'm going to read some accounts, mostly from Captain Robert D. Wilkins, who was commanding the 3rd U.S. at 2nd Manassas. The times that you're going to hear mentioned, and I'll read at least one account by Sykes, you're going to hear times mentioned. These times vary widely. Wilkins notes that something happens at 7 o'clock. Buchanan says the same thing occurred at 10 o'clock. So, what do we make of this? Well, a lot of these reports were written weeks or even months after the battle. So the times are what their recollection is. It's not that they looked at their watch and recorded it. But more importantly, the movements between all these accounts, Wilkins, Buchanan, Sykes, and others, all more or less align. So the general movements and the actions, I think we can assume are accurate. I put this picture of the 8th U.S. In 1863 up here because this is essentially what the 3rd would have looked like, give or take. Obviously, it's not us, but it's a similar regiment, and it gives you a sense for the kind of uniforms and variations in coat style and hats and colors that they probably would have had in 1862. All right, so let's get right into the meat of it. I'm going to use as my map this General National Park Service map. We're all familiar with it. We've seen them. Many of us have them. And it's a good representation of what's there today. But there are some things that are missing on this map, and I'll point them out. Mostly, however, I'm going to be focusing on this area here in the very center between Route 29, the Warrenton Turnpike, in 1862 is going to be in the very center of this action. So as Darrell noted, on the morning of the 30th, the 3rd U.S. had been bivouacking to the east, somewhere between the Stonebridge and Centerville, and they began moving west on the Warrenton Turnpike, Route 29. Captain Wilkins, the 3rd U.S.'s commander, wrote, "We arrived on the old battlefield of Bull Run at about 7 o'clock a.m. A short time after, the brigade was formed in line of battle in front of the John Dogan House, and the regiment ordered forward as skirmishers with orders to occupy the crest of a hill in our front, our left resting on the Alexandria and Warrenton Turnpike." So the first thing I want to point out is that we're more familiar with this house, the Lucinda Dogan House, that is still there today. But Wilkins is talking about the John Dogan House, which is here at the end of Dogan Ridge. And it's featured on historic maps. There is a house there today. It's not John Dogan's house, and it's in a slightly different location. So that's where this is Buchanan's brigade, in which the 3rd U.S. served. And this is Butterfield's brigade that we'll talk about a little later on. And the 3rd U.S. formed as skirmishers on top of the ridge. Not clear if they were in front of the house or behind it. We can't tell, but nonetheless, that's where they stayed. And they stayed here for quite a while. Wilkins next writes, "We remained in this position about 3 hours when I received orders to advance the line, which was done promptly. To effect this, it was necessary to drive the enemy from some houses in our front, in front of our left. This was gallantly done by 3 companies under the command of Lieutenant Sheridan, with the loss of 2 men killed and 3 wounded. A line of skirmishers then connected with those of the Pennsylvania Reserves, the Bucktails on our left, and General Butterfield's on our right. So, as this map shows, after sitting here for about 3 hours, where in front of the Dogan farm on that ridge, they got orders to go forward. This is kind of unusual because skirmishers are supposed to be right in front of the brigade or whatever unit they're skirmishing for, so that when they're recalled, they can quickly join that formation. They are a long way out in front of Buchanan's brigade, which remains sitting on the Dogan Ridge in front of the house during the time the 3rd U.S. advances. The reason the 3rd U.S. was pushed forward to an area where now the Groveton Cemetery is, and if you drive this, you'll see what he means about a hill. It's hard to see on this map, but there is a hill where the cemetery, the Confederate cemetery, is today. The reason for this is that every officer talks about 2 plots of woods. There are woods here, and there are woods over here. And in the middle, of course, is this opening that the road intersection goes through, and Groveton, where the Lucinda Dogan house is. So presumably, Buchanan pushed the 3rd U.S. as skirmishers forward to seize this ground ahead of what they expected would be coming next. So Wilkins also talks about houses on the left, and today all that's there is the Lucinda Dogan house. At the time of the battle, there were houses on both sides of the road. It was Groveton, and many soldiers referred to this as the Battle of Groveton. Not clear why, like in many of these battles, it's hard to say why a name occurs and why it sticks and why others fall away. But nonetheless, Groveton was an important post for the 3rd U.S. So once they got up to that ridge before Groveton, they could see that there were Confederates in the houses in Groveton. And presumably they were being fired on, although Wilkins doesn't say that. So he sends forward 3 companies to the left under the command of First Lieutenant Andrew Sheridan of Company H. In addition to Company H, he sends forward Company C under First Lieutenant George Eckert, and our own beloved Company K under Lieutenant John Whitney. So Company K is actually part of this group that's over here across the road. So most of the regiment is over here north of the Warrenton Turnpike. Company K is south. In some accounts, it has these 3 companies occupying the houses. And Wilkins' own report is written oddly, and it makes it sound as if they did go into the houses. You can, if you read Reese's book on the regular division, on Sykes' regular division, it kind of sounds like Saving Private Ryan with muskets. I doubt it was like that, but it is possible if you read Wilkins' account that that they had entered some of the houses. So that to me is unresolved, but certainly possible. So that's where the 3rd U.S. is as the main attack begins. And now I'm going to focus a bit on the brigades that finally are moving forward. And General Sykes wrote, "From that time until 3:00 p.m., a sharp cannonade ensued and some practice among the skirmishers. Those of the enemy were forced back into the forest on the left of the Warrenton Turnpike, and some houses and fences previously occupied by him were seized and held by my light troops, the 3rd Infantry. About 4 p.m., I was ordered to support an attack to be made by General Butterfield. This attack was based upon the supposition that the enemy was in full retreat. So announced in the orders of General Pope. Porter's Corps was to be the pivot of operations. The troops of our right were to swing toward us, clear the enemy in front, if there, and then by a movement with Porter, we were all to hurry him on his retrograde movement. The Pennsylvania reserves under General J.F. Reynolds had been posted on my left, south of the Warrenton Pike. Just previous to the attack, these troops were withdrawn, leaving my left flank entirely uncovered and the Warrenton Road open. So the regulars, Buchanan's brigade comes forward from the Dogan Ridge. They reach more or less where the skirmishers were, and the 3rd U.S. as a skirmish company moves forward almost to the road. Again, some accounts have them going to the road and going beyond, but that's all reading between the lines of what has been written. It's not clear that they went beyond the road. Most accounts don't mention them even reaching the road. But more importantly, Butterfield's brigade here is launching this assault in what's today called the deep cut on the unfinished railroad cut, which is this dashed line here, which of course is where all Jackson's troops had been. That's where the fighting was the day before, farther to the right. Butterfield's brigade, part of Porter's 5th Corps, is supposed to make good on Porter's failure to follow Pope's orders from the day before. So this attack is in many respects a punishment to make Porter do what he was ordered to do and to follow through with what Pope wants to do, which, as Sykes notes in here, Pope and everybody believes that the Confederates are retreating. And in fact, Lee believes, up until the time of this attack, that Pope is retreating as well. So both sides in the morning think that the enemy is retreating and they're just hoping to let them go and declare a victory. But Pope then orders the attack, and that's what occurs. Now, the 3rd Division, the 3rd Brigade, Warren's is down here, and it is in reserve. And the reason it's south of here is because, as Sykes noted, Reynolds and his corps, or his division, are south here, and the Pennsylvania reserves are supposed to be holding the flank. All of a sudden, they retreat, and they open up that front and cause General Sykes a lot of problems, because now he's supposed to be focusing on his right. Now he has to worry about what's happening on the left, and things are going to go rather badly, rather quickly. So Wilkinson writes, at about 4:30, the attack was made by troops on our right, and a short time after, a movement was observed on our left among the skirmish of the Pennsylvania reserves, which ended in their retiring entirely from the position. This was immediately reported to General Sykes, who directed me to occupy the same ground with my skirmishers, which was accordingly done. The skirmishers of the 3rd Infantry then occupied all the open ground in front, extending from wood to wood. The left of our line of skirmishers was hotly pressed at this time, but the line was held until the movement on our right commenced. So the 3rd U.S. is holding this position together. They're holding Groveton, and it's a critical position. If they fall apart, if there's an attack, the 3rd U.S. is what's going to slow them down to the extent that that's even possible. So at the same time, about the moment that this happens, as Butterfield's brigade is attacking the deep cut and being driven back, that's when Hood's division of Longstreet's command attacks, and that's the open area you see there. At that point, the 3rd U.S. is recalled to Buchanan's brigade, and Captain Wilkins wrote, I then assembled the skirmishers on the right of the turnpike and retired by it, having directed the skirmishers on the left of it to join me. This they were unable to do, but under Lieutenant Sheridan, they assembled on Colonel Warren's brigade and were with them in the fierce engagement which they had on the left. With all the men of my regiment I could gather together, I joined the brigade, which then formed in front of the Henry and Robinson houses. So most of the 3rd U.S. is with Buchanan's brigade retreating toward Henry Hill. But Company K Company C and Company H are here with Lieutenant Sheridan. Now, it's not clear whether Sheridan didn't get the message or whether he was unable to retreat because Hood's attack was so swift that he was startled and simply fell back and found Warren and formed on their flank. The key is that the 3rd U.S., those 3 companies of the 3rd U.S. formed on the right of the 5th and 10th New York, to the right of the 10th New York. So much is made of this action. The 5th and 10th New York paid a tremendous price for this, and yet virtually nothing is mentioned of those 3 companies of the 3rd U.S., again, including Company K. But I would argue that this was an incredibly important moment. Had those 3 companies not formed there, you can see where Warren's position is. And if you go there today, there's this parking lot, this little semicircular parking lot. So right behind that is where the 3rd U.S. formed. The ground slopes up to the high ground where the 10th and 5th New York monuments are. So the 3rd U.S. had the worst position to defend, and yet, had they not been there, Hood could simply have overrun both flanks of Warren's brigade, and there might have been no major stand by the Zouaves. It would have been a rout, and they could all have been captured or killed. And then Longstreet's attack continues forward. But of course, we all know that Warren's brigade and the 3rd U.S. served as that first speed bump to slow Hood down, buying time for the Union to bring up more troops to form up here on Chin Ridge, and a major action would occur here, which slows down Longstreet's attack to the point where it gives the Union a chance to eke out some form, if not victory, at least survival. Right? And after that action, the 3rd U.S., those 3 companies of the 3rd U.S. fell back and joined the rest of the regiment up on Henry Hill. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to TJ.
So thanks, Dave. Thanks for bringing us up to the aftermath of Warren's stand. So Longstreet's attack is roughly 25,000 men. It's one of the biggest Confederate assaults of the war. They roll forward, crushing all Union resistance south of the Warrenton Turnpike until they hit some significant resistance on Chin Ridge here, particularly from McLean's Ohio Brigade and some other units. What that does is 2 things. It buys time for McDowell and Pope to form a secondary defensive line that will ultimately be Henry Hill and pull in Buchanan's brigade and the 3rd U.S. And it also changes the axis of the Confederate advance. So as Dave said, they rolled eastward south of the turnpike like that initially. But the Chin Ridge action pulls them into a kind of a north or a south to north axis, a southwest to northeast. So they're fighting in that direction from the Chin House towards the Stonehouse intersection. So that also buys some time for the Union as the Confederates try to realign and get their attack back, facing towards the objective of Henry Hill that they were given at the start of the attack. So, hold on. This is the initial disposition of the Union defense on Henry Hill. Buchanan and Chapman's brigades, the 2 regular brigades of Sykes' division, find themselves on Warrenton Turnpike. They're grabbed by McDowell and thrown into this position. You'll see Chapman there. He's down in the road. So just to orient you here briefly, you're looking at a satellite image of the visitor center. So where that X is the parking lot. You'll see the visitor center to the right there. Where this second X is the Henry House, or what the reconstructed Henry House is. It was destroyed at the time of the battle, so it was kind of a burned out hulk. And then over here to the left, you'll see that's the entrance to the Nova Community College, and then further on to the left is heading out towards that developed area and 66. So there's elements of 4 different corps this position. So chain of command is going to be a problem. Ostensibly, McDowell has overall command of the defense on the hill, but Sykes is there as well, and there's a few other general officers, and you'll see kind of communication becomes a problem as the day wears on. But under Reynolds, you have 2 brigades of Pennsylvania Reserves to the right of the hill, to the right of the Henry House, under Meade and Seymour, and then a battery. These smaller squares are batteries here. Under Ransom, that's part of the Pennsylvania Reserves. Independent Brigade under Milroy down the road. On his left flank is a brigade of regulars under Chapman, and then kind of having attached themselves to Chapman's far left flank is a unit called the 83rd New York that was part of a brigade that was thrown in to kind of stem the tide on Chin Ridge, and they got separated and they found their way back towards Henry Hill and the Sudley Road cut, and they attached themselves onto the side of Chapman. Buchanan's brigade and the 3rd U.S. are held in reserve. The 3rd is on the right flank of Buchanan, directly behind the house. And for those of you that are familiar with the topography there's a slight depression and a bowl kind of behind the Henry House and behind the visitor center. I suspect they're down in there just to provide shelter. From where they are, they can't see the road. They can kind of see the hill around them and the crest. They'll be able to see the batteries. And a lot of this tree cover across the road in front of where Chapman and Milroy are represented, there's thick trees along the road, but beyond that, Chin Ridge is exposed. So the Union artillery batteries are able to play on the Confederate units that are on Chin Ridge, which provides further impetus for the Confederates to get off Chin Ridge and start making their way downhill towards across Chin Branch and into the cover of those trees to get out of the range of those Union batteries, particularly Hall, because he has some big 20-pound Parrots, and they're definitely able to reach out and touch the Confederate units out there on that exposed ridge line. So initially, elements of Jenkins' brigade hit this line along the road, and I should mention at this point that the road cut is very different than it is today. It's in places 4, 5, sometimes even 6 feet deep, so it's a very, very good defensive position. The Confederates kind of stumble into it. They can't see because of the thick woods and because of the depth of the road. And when Jenkins comes out of the road after their success on Chin Ridge, they recoil very quickly when they get hit by Milroy and Chapman. G.T. Anderson hits Chapman, and they get shoved back into the woods. These are elements of D.R. Jones's division, Confederate division. There's quite a lot of Confederate units that you're going to see tonight, and I'll try to give you some context so you can place them. The last brigade of D.R. Jones's division that gets thrown in is Benning, Rock Benning's Georgia Brigade, and they kind of come in at an oblique angle and roll into the line, and they kind of just happen to emerge in the road at a place that's undefended. And so they very quickly see the advantage of their position. They get into the roadbed on Milroy's flank, and they see Ransom's battery up there on the crest, seemingly undefended, and try to make a rush for it. Let me get rid of the access tree there. There we go. So I broke up Benning's brigade into different regiments because it kind of represent how it played out. But 2 of his regiments get into the road and start coming up the slope of Henry Hill towards Ransom's battery. It's at that moment that Reynolds orders both Meade and Seymour's brigades down into the road. They charge down the slope, pushing Benning's Georgia brigade back across the road. Meade they're a little bit over enthusiastic, and they get beyond the road. And they kind of get exposed and shoot up a little bit on their flanks, because you can see he has regiments on both Meade's flanks there. At least that's what I was trying to illustrate. But they fall back into the road and hold that position. So for the time being, they're okay there. The position is holding well. Buchanan's brigade and the 3rd haven't been committed yet, but they know there's a lot of fighting going on in front of them. The volume of fire from all the accounts is very heavy. And so, like I said, the line's holding well until this point. And this is when things start to come undone. Wright's brigade of Georgians are coming up again. This is a massive assault by Longstreet, and he hasn't even committed the majority of it yet. So you're going to see constant Confederate reinforcements, units being replaced to throw at this Union Henry Hill position. The thing that really, and these are Anderson's. This is Richard Herron Anderson's division, by the way, just to keep you up to date. So the thing that really undoes this position is that the Confederates are able to overlap the Union left flank, with both Mahone's brigade coming up there, but more importantly, these two small red squares here that are off in the developed area now represent two Confederate batteries that are used in the advance. And this is one of those few, just something important to note, this is one of those few examples in the war where an army is able to use artillery in the offensive. That kind of old Napoleonic tactic of using artillery in the attack. And they get in a great position where they can enfilade that entire line. And it doesn't take very long with that and the arrival of Mahone, the arrival of Wright, unhinge that entire line. Milroy's brigade starts to waver. When that happens, Monroe's battery pulls out of there. He's going to disappear. With that artillery on their flank and Mahone coming up, the 83rd peels out and they pull away some of Chapman's flank with them. So the line is in crisis at this point. And so I think just in terms of timing, I think we're about at 6 p.m. All the accounts that mention times say that this happens about 6 o'clock. So it's still light, but the Confederates are kind of in a race against time to seize Henry Hill and be able to affect the Union retreat down the Warrenton Turnpike. What happens now is essentially that Milroy goes riding back to McDowell's command post somewhere behind Buchanan's brigade, behind the 3rd, down here. As you'll see, I've broken out Buchanan's brigade into their component units now, because that's going to become kind of important to what we're talking about. So Buchanan's brigade's about to get in the fight. You'll notice on the other side of the road, a new fresh Confederate brigade has come up, Wilcox's brigade. He's not quite in the fight yet, but he will be shortly. So Milroy rides to McDowell's headquarters. He's frantic, he's hysterical. A lot of, he's waving his sword around. A lot of the accounts kind of comment on this. People are asking who that is, who is that officer. McDowell doesn't really pay a lot of attention to him. He kind of ignores him, and he sends an aide to talk to Meade. He says, "Go ask Meade what's going on down the road. If Meade says we need help, then I'll believe him." And so the officer comes back and says that we're in trouble. And so McDowell dispatches Buchanan. I believe he tells Sykes. He gives the order to Sykes because I think Buchanan says that he got his order from Sykes. So we know Sykes is with McDowell. So Sykes orders Buchanan forward. Buchanan personally takes the 12th, 2nd Battalion of the 14th, and 1st Battalion of the 14th down to the left to reinforce Chapman and Milroy, who are in quite a struggle with Wright and will be shortly with Wilcox. While that's happening, while Buchanan's gone, Milroy appears in front of the 3rd and the 4th, who are left behind. He makes an appeal to them, tries to kind of pump them up, rally them, and get them to follow him forward. They give him 3 cheers, and they double quick forward without orders necessarily from Buchanan. Although that, I don't think they knew what was happening. But they double quick forward down onto the crest. The 4th and the 3rd on either side of that old farm lane in front of the Henry house that leads down into the Sudley Road, and they appear on that crest there above the Pennsylvania reserves and what's left of Milroy's brigade, and they start pouring fire down into the Confederates up there. So what the Confederates are facing here, which is a problem that they're going to experience throughout this action, is that they're essentially fighting 2 lines at once. They're fighting the line that's sheltered down in the road, and then they're fighting a line of battle that's up on the crest, firing over the heads of those guys down into them. And this is why, despite the Confederates' numbers and bringing up fresh units, that they have such a difficult time gaining the road and getting across it. So the 3rd and 4th fire a series of volleys. The commander of the 4th says 6, and I think from other accounts it's probably 3 volleys by each unit. That essentially ends the danger to that side of the road. You don't hear a peep out of the Confederates on that section of the road after that. And so they certainly do their job there and plug that hole. So, but the problem is the troops on the road are starting to run out of ammunition, and you start to see things kind of come unhinged, and brigade commanders are acting independently at this point. It's unclear who's giving orders, but sometime after Buchanan deploys, the 3rd and the 4th, or sometime after Buchanan deploys and the 3rd and the 4th are led by Milroy up to the crest. Milroy's guys pull out of the road, so you're going to start to see the blue disappear from the hill very quickly. Buchanan's arrival allows Chapman to retreat, and so when he sees Buchanan coming with those 3 units, he pulls his guys out because they are flanked. They've got Mahone on their flank and in their rear by this point, and he gets out of there. Now there's some kind of a miscommunication here, and I'm not quite sure what happens, but either Chapman doesn't tell Buchanan where Mahone is, or that there's Confederates on that side of the road, or Buchanan doesn't know that they're as close as they are, because he plugs his guys right into the road where Chapman just pulled out of, essentially putting himself in the same position that Chapman was in, although they've contracted the line much further down. It doesn't extend nearly as far down to the left as it did before. The fortunate thing for the Union at this time is that Mahone gets shot sometime shortly after they cross the road, and whoever takes command from him is not interested in pressing this advantage. As this battle wears on, there's the better part of 3 Confederate brigades on the other side of the road behind the Union line. Mahone's brigade, Armistead's brigade, and a brigade under a guy by the name of Drayton, who is a kind of a political appointee, a friend of Jefferson Davis. None of them are able to press the attack and roll up this whole Union line on Henry Hill with the advantage they have of position and numbers. So they are very fortunate that never materializes. So now there's another wave of Confederates coming up. Wright's guys are relieved by Wilcox. Mahone starts to move forward, but like I said, they're not really pressing the advantage in the way they could. So just to take us back to the situation overall, just zooming back out again. So you're going to notice that the Pennsylvania reserves are gone. Reynolds has pulled Seymour and Meade's brigades out and taking Ransom's battery with them, because that is they're attached to his division. There's a miscommunication there. All of Meade and Reynolds' report both say that we were relieved by Buchanan, we were relieved by the regulars, but there appears to be some kind of confusion because they weren't. The intention was not for them to leave. So you see this kind of these elements of 4 different corps and the mix-ups and the chain of command happening here. So they leave, but like I said, and again, the Confederates aren't able to take advantage of that. And there's no serious push across the road once they've pulled out of there. So Buchanan rides back to retrieve the 3rd and the 4th. He sees that Milroy has pushed the 3rd and the 4th forward, and they have this kind of what I can only imagine was a bizarre conversation about whether or not Milroy or Buchanan was in command of Buchanan's brigade. He kind of tells Milroy to go away, and then Milroy rides off, and he'll reappear later in kind of a funny little vignette. But he grabs the 3rd and the 4th and brings them over to support the other 3 units of the brigade just in the nick of time, because the 12th has realized what kind of position they've been put in, and they pull out and it's kind of a user capacity issue with the animation, but I'm not able to illustrate that. They pull out to the tree line and orient themselves towards Mahone, because they realize that there's a significant Confederate force on their left, and they're going to try to hold it back. So just in the nick of time as that's happening, Buchanan comes up with the 3rd and the 4th. He plugs the 4th right in there in the road. where I and a couple of other authors believe is probably right at the entrance station, or the park entrance rather. He plugs the 4th in there, and the 3rd is in kind of at an oblique angle behind the 1st Battalion of the 14th, and the 4th firing down again over their heads into Wilcox, keeping those guys pinned down. Just another brief note here. You'll notice a final support has come up from another corps here, 9th Corps, brigade under Ferrero, personally led by Reno, their corps commander, onto the field. Ferrero is of Burnside Bridge fame, so that brigade will engage in that action in about 3 weeks' time. But they're going to be the last support and the last reserve on the hill. So just going back to the 3rd, they get there quickly. They're in position. They pour 3 volleys into Wilcox across the road, which allows the 2 battalions of the 14th to withdraw and get out of there. So this must have been a very difficult maneuver. A lot of the accounts comment on this. It was very delicate to do this under fire and to be able to kind of cover those 2 regiments as they pulled out. You'll notice in the animation, I kind of have them going through their lines, coming across. I'm not really sure that that's how it happened. I suspect they probably went around them. But they form a second line of battle behind the 3rd and the 4th. The 12th and the 2 battalions of the 14th form a second line of battle as a support. And then we're around 7 o'clock now. Buchanan realizes that he's got too many Confederates to deal with. They're coming from too many angles. And he knows Ferrero is up now. He's farther up on the crest. He has artillery support, and so he says, okay, it's time to pull out. So they begin to move towards Henry House, back to their original position where they are going to reform to leave the battlefield. While that happens, 3rd and the 4th cover the retreat. So much like at the wheat field, the 3rd marches about 30 yards, about faces and fires a volley into Wilcox. They march off again after about facing, march another 60 yards, and then fire another volley. And that successfully suppresses the Confederate threat from across the road. Like I said, Mahone's gone to ground. They're not going to advance any further. There's no threat on their flank. So once they pin Wilcox's guys down with those disciplined volleys, they're able to successfully extract themselves from that position. And at that point, Ferrero assumes the defense of the hill as darkness sets in. So the brigade forms up behind the, let me put it on here, behind the Henry House here. They form up there, and in a very orderly, disciplined way, they march off the field and onto the Warrenton Turnpike, heading towards Centerville. And they arrive at Centerville sometime between midnight and 1 a.m. With very little straggling, as Buchanan writes in his report. So, take us to the next slide. Excuse me. So casualties in conclusion. Like I said, the 3rd and Buchanan Brigade retreat across Bull Run, arriving in the defense of Centerville between midnight and 1 a.m. The casualties of the 3rd during the course of this day, 5 killed, 17 wounded, and there's 25 that are missing. I'm sure that the other speakers can speak to this as well, but our conclusion is that a lot of those missing are wounded that are captured in the morning skirmish action and during the initial parts of Hood's assault. I don't think they take too serious of casualties on Henry Hill. I think there's a fair amount of casualties that happen in the morning. And just 2 kind of personal notes on Company K. 2nd Lieutenant Whitney, that Dave mentioned earlier, was wounded. We don't know during the course of the action. We don't know when exactly, but he is mentioned for his courage and his coolness in both Buchanan and Wilkins' report. And the 1st Sergeant of Company K, T.B. Litzinger, is mentioned also for his bravery in the report. So just two little personal notes there on Company K. Okay, so that wraps up essentially the day for the 3rd and our presentation here. Does anyone have any questions for us?
TJ, this is Jim Tate.
Yeah, Jim.
And I'm going to kind of go backward here, but I've got some that I think Darrell and Dave will be able to answer. Was there any record of the casualties in the 3 companies that were with Lieutenant Sheridan?
No, we don't know that. We wish we did. That would answer a lot of questions for us, but we don't know. It wasn't broken down by company. I was just reviewing another record in the ORs today, and I found a kind of a demi brigade where he broke out one of his regiments by companies and listed casualties, and I was just thinking how nice that would be to have, but we don't have that.
And this is kind of an open question to everybody. Would there be a chance if we looked at the next pay period muster roll, if we could determine who didn't show up for pay, and because there would have been a record of when they were wounded, to make sure that the pay was done properly.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Jim. That's something we could look at the returns. Unfortunately, of course, the archives are closed because of COVID. So, we could go look through the records to see if the returns or the pay records or anything else might have a hint to that. But yeah, right now there's no way to know. But it's something worth looking into, because again, particularly those 3 companies that fought on next to Warren's brigade, that's a heroic stand, and the Zouaves get all the attention. The regulars typically get nothing.
Serves us right for not voting.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm bringing this up, it's my understanding that the soldiers were paid every 2 months, and you hear accounts of first sergeants and officers frantically getting together before the paymaster got there to bring the muster rolls up to date, because they have to know when, a guy was not there and therefore he didn't get any pay or whatever. And I was kind of hoping that if we can find the muster rolls, we get a clue as to who disappeared about this time. And from what company, it would have to be done on a company basis.
Yeah, and that's something you might have thought that Reese would do, but Reese, of course, is looking at the division.
Yeah.
So that's probably too deep. That even if he had thought to go look at it, now you're talking about a massive book if you start going into every company and
Sure.
Down to that level of detail. So
And there's
yes,
kind of note to that too. In the records that I've got from Greg Koska, 5 or 6 guys that actually deserted from Harrison's Landing while they were sitting there in July, and at least 2 deserted from the encampment at Manassas the day before the battle.
And that would have come probably from the muster roll records.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can get in touch with Greg and see if we can get those at a later date. Another question I had too was, and this pertains to Sheridan because it's got me kind of curious. Did he leave any? I know he didn't make a report, okay, but did he leave any letters or any written account at all of his actions and what was going on there? Because when I read Reese's book again, and then going over what you guys have shown in the map, I get the feeling that that he was stuck across the turnpike and really couldn't get back.
Yeah, so the short answer is I haven't been able to find any. Again, I'd need to go to the archives and do some digging, and when they open up, that's something I hope to be able to do. I wasn't able to find why they didn't return. Sheridan didn't write anything about it that I've been able to find. The only thing we know is what he told Wilkins, and obviously Wilkins references him in the report, so Sheridan must have told Wilkins those things that happened, because they're things that he describes in that report. There was a sergeant who was captured inside one of the houses where they were surrounded. Well, Wilkins was unlikely to have seen all of that. He had enough to worry about with the company north of the turnpike. So Sheridan must have told him those details that went into his report, but I've not seen anything that he wrote.
Right. And along that line too, the Warrenton Turnpike was a privately built road. Is that right? Okay.
Yes, it was a toll road. Yeah.
Okay. Was it paved, and how wide was it?
That is, I don't know. That there were parts of it that were macadamized, but I don't think that portion necessarily was. But I don't know the answer to that exactly. I know that the whole road was not paved.
Right.
But there were toll gates. So there was a toll gate at Groveton.
Mm-hmm.
There was also a toll gate at the Stone House. Well, they're not that far apart.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a pretty quick toll.
Yeah, that's we think the
in New Jersey.
That's in New Jersey,
yeah.
Garden State Parkway.
Yeah, exactly. We think the Dulles Toll Road's expensive.
And the reason what I was getting to was, if that was a fairly wide road, even it was 2 wagons wide, and cleared, he may not have been able to cross it without exposing his men to a lot of rifle fire down the road. In which case he said, "Screw it, I'm going to stay on this side, and we'll just go join the other guys."
And I think that's a reasonable concern. That's what Reese claims. I haven't found anything in any firsthand source to confirm that. I think he's speculating, but it's probably good informed speculation, because it was a wider road than, it was a major road. And as you say, it was a privately created road that farmers and towns paid for to go from Warrenton to Alexandria, which was the major port for all their crops. So it certainly was a wider road, and was, I think it was a 2-lane road. If you see pictures from immediately after the battle, it's pretty wide, and of course there's open ground around much of it.
Okay.
One of the things,
Just out of curiosity, has anyone looked at the Confederate accounts to maybe they talk about the Federals that are in their front, maybe trying to make a move across the road and getting pushed in the direction of supporting Warren?
Hood doesn't mention it in his book, but that's a good question. I haven't looked at Confederate magazine articles that might mention it, but yeah, that's a good approach we ought to take.
certainly nobody censured Sheridan for doing anything wrong by not coming back across the turnpike. Both Wilkins and Buchanan were praising him for his handling of those 3 companies over there.
I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah.
They both praise him by name.
Yes.
So clearly whatever he didn't have, all his orders said to do was to go up, clear Groveton and hold it, which he did. Everything else he did was really on his own initiative.
It's interesting to note too that Sheridan was a direct commission in March of '61 and didn't join the regiment until May, and 10 days later was a company commander. Okay, so he matured really quick. And I think that's really impressive right there. The kid, and he was 19 when he got commissioned, so he had a good head on his shoulders. One other question I had, and this, Darrell, this kind of goes back to your slides. When the 5th Corps came up from the peninsula, I get the impression that their logistical train didn't follow them at all. I mean, if they ran out of rations,
Didn't really say much about that, and that one mentioned by Myers, really all that talks much about that march from Falmouth up. And I wondered why the Fifth Corps was the one that they sent by that route. Almost the rest of the Army of the Potomac in its entirety came up to Alexandria and disembarked there, which, gave them a much, much shorter route of march. But, trying to put myself in Halleck's shoes, maybe he just wanted that corps to be interposed between Lee and McClellan and act like they were threatening the railroad too. But so they hit the railroad at Bealeton, which must have caught the Confederates' attention because the big rail hub at Gordonsville was where the Orange and Alexandria joined the Virginia Central.
Mhm.
Whatever it was, they had a 5-day march through, some pretty rough country and not much in the way of food or water to go with it. I think they were expecting to get a big ration issue at Manassas Junction when they got there because, there were rail cars full of bacon and salt pork and all kind of good things.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Jackson got there ahead of them.
One last question. It's always been my understanding growing up in Northern Virginia that the Warrenton Turnpike, that 29 is exactly on the roadbed of the Warrenton Turnpike. Does everybody agree with that?
Yeah, I think
Yes.
it must be close.
Yeah, it deviates in some places where, for example, they built a new bridge over the, when they rebuilt the stone bridge after it was blown up. Initially went the same way. Then they, of course, built a modern bridge in, I think, the 20s. So, but it does essentially follow the same route because it was such a wide, well-traveled road. All they did was pave it.
Yeah, they didn't have to do much landscaping even when they widened it
Right.
in the 50s and 60s. And I say that too, having been down at Chancellorsville when they widened the Orange Turnpike that goes through Chancellorsville. When they were digging it up to widen it, they found planks that had been left there when the road was originally laid down. So they weren't interested in surveying, lots of new routes for those highways.
Right. Well, after all, Braddock Road out here is the road that General Braddock took. And that was based on an Indian path.
Yep.
So,
For those of you that will be at Manassas this weekend, you can actually see the original Sudley roadbed just off of where the Sudley Road is now on the Henry Hill side.
Yeah.
We can take a walk down there and see it. Still left right where the 4th US went into the road down there. So
Okay. That's all my questions. Good work. Great. Great presentation for everybody.
Thanks.
thank you. And I encourage people to, to think about other programs they'd like to see. We were discussing this, we were prepping for this session that, this is a great thing. Reenactors can tell you how many stitches go in the, the cuff of their sack coat, but many of them can't tell you anything about the battles that they're supposed to be portraying. So this, I think, is a great opportunity. I know I've learned a lot in this. So, I'd love to see us do more things like this.
97 stitches are on the cuff.
I knew it.
Nerd.
Way too much time on his hands.
Yeah, I hand sewed the trousers and the shirt and the coat. So
You need a hobby, son.
Yeah.
Get cable.
I have a
Well,
4-year-old. She takes a lot of time.
Hey, Dave, as sort of the president, yeah, I hope we can do more of these, and certainly, hope that you guys aren't disheartened that we can't get more people, coming out and in a way getting on. But I think you got to start somewhere, and I think Paul suggested I can't remember. I can't keep track of all the emails, so I apologize. But a YouTube channel, And I think that would be good. And I agree with you 100% that, you know, every time I think I know something, you sit in something like this and you learn more. So I appreciate the effort that was put in by all three. It's you know, it's an interesting, to learn a little bit more about the unit and stuff that you're doing. And, you know, when you go to the battle, I was just up at Gettysburg this past weekend with my wife, and we were driving around and just kind of doing some genealogy, tracking one of my relatives who was in the 1st South Carolina. And it's, you know, you can sit there and do a lot of the reading but to sit there and figure out, hey, this is where they were actually at. My one relative who was the 13th Mississippi in Barksdale's brigade. His nickname became Peg Leg because he lost his leg at Cedar Creek. But no, I hope we can do more of these things and hopefully, you know, it maybe expand it out. And I know Paul is really good about putting it out there, but you know, it's going to start somewhere. So I really look forward to more of these sessions. And even when things get back to normal, whatever that's going to be, we can continue to do these kind of things monthly. As far as the National Archives is concerned, don't look for them to open up till the not even before the end of the year. If you want to do research. Yeah, I know. Not my call. He's 2 levels above me.
I'll make a plug here, though. There's a partnership between the archives and I think it's Ancestry called fold3.com. And you can find a lot of the digitized records in there. It's a subscription service. I mean, they have a free service where you can preview. I paid $79.95 a year for the full service.
I think Fold 3 is actually done by Ancestry.
That's what it's Ancestry,
Yes,
but
Okay.
records archives.
Yeah.
And that is a great resource, not just for the Civil War, but I had my grandfather's World War I journal, and so I go in and I plugged both of my grandfather's names in the World War I records, and I found the ships that they went to France and came back on. You know, they still had the manifests.
Yeah, it's an invaluable resource and well worth the cost. You know,
I don't
to
think
get
they
in.
had a lot of records from the regular army in there for some reason.
Yeah. Well, and Ancestry has a lot of records as well.
Yes.
There's also, Darrell, there's also a few, I've come across records that are mislabeled. I've come across regular Army records that are labeled as USCT, but they're actually, you know, it says 8th USCT in the, you know, the digital tag, but it's actually the 8th Infantry.
Saying that the Army makes bureaucratic mistakes on the paperwork all the I
Yeah.
thought that was just a new thing.
Imagine that.
All right, everybody. This video will be available on the soon-to-be revealed YouTube page.
Right.
We'll be talking about that, but hopefully, I'm hoping by Monday to have this thing posted. So stay tuned for that.
And
Great,
I know a number of people will watch. To put in a plug for the YouTube channel idea, a number of people had said to me, "I couldn't make your presentation, but I watched it after the fact." So, you know, I think that's a great idea.
Works for me.
All right.
All right.
Thanks
Well,
everyone for coming.
Setting this up, guys. This was really awesome. Great way to spend an evening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Great.
A whole bunch of new questions.
All right.
Yeah, as always, right?
Yep.